All right, how is everyone doing tonight? Tonight we are going to read through chapter 19 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. This is by Charles Dickens. This will not be your typical reading. We're not just going to read the words. We are going to read through and talk about interesting vocabulary words or interesting phrases, and I will stop and explain things I think it might be difficult for you to understand. So if you're watching this live, I always encourage you to make questions in the comment section. And if I didn't explain a word or if you don't understand a phrase, I really do want you to ask me about it in the comments. That's what makes this interesting and different from obviously other readings of the book. So in chapter 18, which we did yesterday, Davy has grown up. He is now 17 or 18 years old. He fell in love with an older woman, and she actually was married to a very old man. She had agreed to marry a very old man and broke his heart. And that is where we left off in chapter 19. Chapter 18. So here's chapter 19, which is, I look about me and make a discovery. To look about yourself means to look around. So I look around myself, I look about me, and I make a discovery. I am doubtful whether I was at heart glad or sorry when my school days drew to an end, and the time came for my leaving Dr. Strong's. I had been very happy there. I had a great attachment for the doctor, and I was eminent and distinguished in that little world. So Davy made quite a reputation for himself at the school as being the top student. He was very sad to leave there and go into another new, strange world. For these reasons I was sorry to go, but for other reasons, unsubstantial enough, I was glad. My ideas of being a young man at my own disposal, of the importance attaching to a young man at his own disposal, of the wonderful things to be seen and done by that magnificent animal, and the wonderful effects he could not fail to make upon society, lured me away. So Davy was sad to be leaving the school because of his reputation and the world around him, the little world around him that he loved, all of his friends and his family. But he was also excited to be going away and being old enough and independent to be able to do everything that he wanted to do, to go out into the world and do something. So powerful were these visionary considerations in my boyish mind that I seem, according to my present way of thinking, to have left school without natural regret. The separation has not made the impression on me that other separations have. I try in vain to recall how I felt about it and its circumstances and what its circumstances were. To do something in vain means to do something but not to get a result. So if you try in vain to remember something, that means you're trying to remember something, but you can't. You never will remember that thing. And here, what is he talking about? The separation has not made an impression on me that other separations have. I try in vain to recall, to remember how I felt about it. So he's writing this story much, much later in his life. And as he's writing, he's trying to remember all the way back then, 20 years ago, how I felt in that situation, but he can't remember. That's why he says, I try in vain. I can't do it. The separation has not made an impression on me that other separations have. I try in vain to recall how I feel about it and what its circumstances were, but it is not momentous in my recollection. Momentous meaning, I think, big. I suppose the opening prospect confused me. I know that my juvenile experiences went for little or nothing, and that if life was more like a great fairy story, which I was about to begin to read, than anything else. My aunt and I had held many grave deliberations on the calling to which I should be devoted. So that's very different English, but what it means is my aunt and I had many conversations about what kind of career I should have. For a year or more, I had endeavored to find a satisfactory answer to her often repeated question, what I would like to be. But I had no particular liking that I could discover for anything. If I have been inspired with a knowledge of the science of navigation, taken the command of a fast sailing ship, expedition, and gone round the world on a triumphant voyage of discovery, I think I might have considered myself completely suited. So Davy couldn't decide what he wanted to be, and he was thinking I could even be the captain of a ship or be in charge of a ship, and that would be a great job for me. But in the absence of any such miraculous provision, my desire was to apply myself to some pursuit that would not lie too heavily upon her purse. But in order to be the commander or captain of a ship, I guess takes a lot of money. Maybe you have to buy your own ship. So since that was not a possibility, since his aunt could not buy him a ship, he would have to think of something different. And to do my duty in it, whatever it might be. Mr. Dick had regularly assisted at our councils with a meditative and sage demeanor. Sage means like wise. He never made a suggestion, but once, and on that occasion I do not know what put it in his head, he suddenly proposed that I should be a brassiere. A brassiere is clothing for women for this area. My aunt received this proposal so very ungraciously. So the aunt was very angry and offended when Mr. Dick isn't 100% in reality. So I think he meant barrister. We'll probably see that in a minute. But he said brassiere, which is ladies' clothing for this area. And the aunt got angry. That he never ventured on a second, but ever afterwards confined himself to looking watchfully at her for suggestions and rattling his money. So when he made that suggestion, the aunt got very upset, and after that, he never made another suggestion, because obviously he didn't mean to be a brassiere, but he made the aunt very angry, so he stopped making suggestions. Trot, I tell you what, my dear, said my aunt one morning in the Christmas season when I left school, as this knotty point is still unsettled, and as we must not make a mistake in our decision if we can help it, I think we had better take a little breathing time. In the meanwhile, you must try to look at it from a new point of view, and not as a schoolboy. So to take a little breathing time, I think what she means by that is let's stop thinking about it for a while. Let's take a break. Let's rest from talking about this or thinking about this. But try not to think of it as a child. Try to think of this as an adult. I will, aunt. It has occurred to me, pursued my aunt, that a little change and a glimpse of life out of doors may be useful in helping you to know your own mind and form a cooler judgment. Suppose you were to go down to that old part of the country again, for instance, and see that out-of-the-way woman with the savagest of names, said my aunt, rubbing her nose, for she could never thoroughly forgive Peggotty for being so called. Davy's aunt hates the name Peggotty. She has from the very moment that she met Peggotty. She was outraged at that name. And the aunt is saying, maybe you should go visit Peggotty. So if you haven't been watching recently, then maybe you don't know that Peggotty was the maid in the house where Davy grew up, and she's an old woman, and she used to take care of Davy. So she's kind of like a grandmother to him, and he loves her very much, and she loves him very much. And the aunt is suggesting, maybe you should go to that town where Peggotty lives and stay with her for a while. Of all the things in the world, Aunt, I should like it best. Well, said my aunt, that's lucky, for I should like it too. But it's natural and rational that you should like it, and I am very well persuaded that whatever you do, Trot, will always be natural and rational. I hope so, Aunt. Your sister, Betsy Trotwood, said my aunt, would have been as natural and rational a girl as ever breathed. You'll be worthy of her, won't you? That his sister doesn't exist. The book begins when Davy is born, and that's the first time we meet the aunt. His mother is all alone, and she's very young, and she's about to give birth to her child. And the aunt, which is the father's aunt, really, but the father is dead, the aunt comes to help. But the aunt insists that the mother is going to have a girl, and that she should be called Betsy Trotwood, which is the aunt's name. And when Davy was born, she was extremely angry and left the house, and they never saw her again until Davy ran away. And so she's always talking about this girl, his sister, Betsy Trotwood, who doesn't exist. I hope I shall be worthy of you, Aunt. That will be enough for me. It's a mercy that poor dear baby of a mother of yours didn't live, said my aunt. That means that actually the aunt is saying, it's a good thing that your mother died. It's kind of what she's saying, looking at me approvingly, or she'd have been so vain of her boy by this time that her soft little head would have been completely turned, if there was anything of it left to turn. She's saying, it's a good thing that your mother died, because if she were alive now, she would be a horrible person, because she would be so proud of you that nobody could stand her. My aunt always excused any weakness of her own in my behalf by transferring it in this way to my poor mother. Bless me, Trotwood, how do you remind me of her? Pleasantly, I hope, Aunt. So actually the aunt, when she has these affectionate feelings for Davy, she always projects them to the dead mother, because she's a very hard woman, and it's not easy for her to admit feelings. He's as like her, Dick, said my aunt emphatically. He's as like her as she was that afternoon before she began to fret. Bless my heart. He's as like her as he can look at me out of his two eyes. To fret is to worry. Is he indeed, says Mr. Dick. And he's like David, too. That's the father, said my aunt. That's her nephew, David, decisively. He's very like David, said Mr. Dick. But what I want you to be, Trot, resumed my aunt, I don't mean physically, but morally. You're very well physically, is a firm fellow. Well, let me read that again. You're very well physically. But what I want, but morally, is a firm fellow. A fine, firm fellow with a will of your own, with resolution. So what that means is I want you to be confident. I want you to be a very confident person. You look very good, but I want you to be confident. Shaking her cap at me and clenching her hand with determination. With character, Trot, with strength of character that is not to be influenced, except on good reason, by anybody or anything. That's what I want you to be. That's what your father and mother might have been, heaven knows, and have been the better for it. I intimated that I hoped I should be what she described. So I intimated just means I told her. That you may begin in a small way to have a reliance upon yourself and to act for yourself, said my aunt, I shall send you upon your trip alone. I did think once of Mr. Dick's going with you, but on second thoughts, I shall keep him to take care of me. Mr. Dick for a moment looked a little disappointed, until the honor and dignity of having to take care of the most wonderful woman in the world restored the sunshine to his face. Besides, said my aunt, there's the memorial. Oh, certainly, said Mr. Dick in a hurry. I intend, Trotwood, to get that done immediately. It really must be done immediately. And then it will go in, you know. And then, said Mr. Dick, after checking himself and pausing a long time, there'll be a pretty kettle of fish. To me, a pretty kettle of fish means a problem. Wait, let me just check that. I'm pretty sure that's what it means, though. Like, that's a pretty kettle of fish. That's a pretty kettle of fish. A difficult, annoying situation. Yeah, so it's not an extremely common expression in modern English, I think. Maybe you could still say it if you wanted to. It would probably sound a little bit funny. But he's saying, there'll be a pretty kettle of fish. There'll be a bad situation, a horrible situation, an annoying situation. In pursuance of my aunt's kind scheme, I was shortly afterwards fitted out with a handsome purse of money and a portmanteau, and tenderly dismissed upon my expedition. Portmanteau. Wait a minute. I just want to check. That must be something other than what I thought it was. Yeah, do you know what a portmanteau is? In modern English, anyway, it's when you combine two words together. So, that's what I thought it was, but it must be a piece of clothing or something like that in the story, because that's not what it means here. But a portmanteau is when you force two words together. Wait, let me find some examples of a portmanteau. Brunch. Brunch, for example, is a combination of breakfast and lunch. Brunch. That's a portmanteau. Sitcom. That's situation comedy put together. Spork. Do you know what a spork is? A spork is a combination of a spoon with a fork. So that's how you would use a portmanteau in modern English. But let me see, 19th century portmanteau. It must be like a carrying case or kind of suitcase. Okay, let's see if we can find. So it meant something different 150, 170 years ago. Oh, they're kind of cool. I like them. I want a portmanteau. Here's a portmanteau. So, but if you say portmanteau now, people will think about like breakfast and lunch, brunch, smushing two words together. But it meant something different 150 years ago. Okay. In pursuance of my aunt's kind scheme, I was shortly afterwards fitted out with a handsome purse of money and a portmanteau, and tenderly dismissed upon my expedition. At parting, my aunt gave me some good advice, and a good many kisses, and said that her object was that I should look about me, and think a little. She would recommend me to stay a few days in London, if I liked it, either on my way down into Suffolk or coming back. In a word, I was at liberty to do what I would, for 3 weeks, or a month, and no other conditions were imposed upon my freedom than before mentioned, thinking and looking about me, and a pledge to write 3 times a week, and faithfully report myself. I went to Canterbury first, that I might take leave of Agnes and Mr. Wickfield, my old room in whose house I had not yet relinquished. To relinquish something means to let go of something. So maybe it means he was still paying for the room, or at least he was still keeping things in the room at Mr. Wickfield's. And also of the good doctor. Agnes was very glad to see me and told me that the house had not been like itself since I had left it. So when you say the house had not been like itself since you left it, that means it doesn't seem the same. Things are different now that you're gone. That's what it means. The house is not the same. Well, he lived there for about 7 or 8 years with them. I'm sure I'm not like myself when I'm away, said I. I seem to want my right hand when I miss you. Though that's not saying much, for there's no head in my right hand, and no heart. Everyone who knows consults with you, and is guided by you, Agnes. Everyone who knows me spoils me, I believe, she answered, smiling. No, it's because you're like no one else. You're so good, you're so sweet-tempered. You have such a gentle nature, and you're always right. You talk, said Agnes, breaking into a pleasant laugh, as she sat at work, as if I were the late Miss Larkins. That's the older woman who Davy was in love with. So Agnes is saying, you're talking like you're in love with me. Come, it's not fair to abuse my confidence, I answered, reddening at the recollection of my blue enslaver. One night there was a party, there was a ball, and Davy was invited. This was his first adult ball. And Miss Larkins was wearing everything in blue, a big beautiful blue dress and blue flowers in her hair. And so he calls her my blue enslaver. But I shall confide in you, just the same, Agnes, as I can never grow out of that. Whenever I fall into trouble or fall in love, I shall always tell you, if you'll let me, even when I come to fall in love in earnest. Earnest means to be in a hurry, or with a lot of enthusiasm and in a hurry. Why have you always been in earnest? Said Agnes, laughing. So why have you always been in a hurry? Why are you in such a hurry? Oh, that was as a child or a schoolboy, said I, laughing in my turn, not without being a little shamefaced. Times are altering now, and I suppose I shall be in a terrible state of earnestness one day or other. My wonder is that you are not in earnest yourself by this time, Agnes. Agnes laughed again and shook her head. Oh, I know you're not, said I, because if you had been who you would have told me, or at least, for I saw a faint blush in her face. Wait, let me read that again. Oh, I know you're not, said I, because if you had, you would have told me, or at least, so I think by saying being in earnest, it means like desperately in love. So he's embarrassing her by talking about that. Remember, let's reread that, but let's think about being in earnest as code for being desperately in love. Because, back then it wasn't polite to talk about those kinds of things, even if they're really good friends. I shall be in a terrible state of earnestness one day or another, so I'll be madly in love one day or another. My wonder is that you are not in earnest yourself by this time, Agnes. So that would be very impolite 170 years ago to be to directly say to a young lady, I bet you'll be madly in love by that time too. So they're using this little code of being in earnest, being desperate, being in a hurry for something. So it's okay as long as it's in code like that. And Agnes laughed and shook her head. Oh, I know you're not, said I, because if you had, you would have told me, or at least. So if you had really been madly in love, you would have told me. For I saw a faint blush in her face. You would have let me find it out for myself. So maybe it would not have been very ladylike for her to go to Davy and tell her, I'm in love. But she would have maybe left clues or tried to show him so that he could discover it without her saying anything. But there's no one that I know of who deserves to love you, Agnes. Someone of a nobler character and more worthy altogether than anyone I have never seen here must rise up before I give my consent. So Davy is saying, I will not give permission to anyone to love you unless they're really high and wonderful people. He thinks of her like a sister, but also I think he's a little bit in love with her. In the time to come, I shall have a wary eye on all admirers. Wary means, the way that we use wary means like tired. But his eye would be tired because he would be watching everyone, making sure that no one would take advantage of her. In the time to come, I shall have a wary eye on all admirers. So he'll be sitting there looking, examining all of them, making sure that they're good enough for her, and shall exact a great deal from the successful one, I assure you. We had gone on so far in a mixture of confidential jest. Jest means humor, laughing, having a good time, and earnest. And so this word earnest here doesn't mean being desperately in love, but maybe just like tension, feeling like in a hurry because maybe this is the last time that they will see each other for a long time. That had long grown naturally out of our familiar relations. Or maybe it does mean love. Begun as mere children, but Agnes now suddenly lifting up her eyes to mine and speaking in a different manner. Trotwood, there is something that I want to ask you, and that I may not have another opportunity of asking for a long time, perhaps. Something I would ask, I think, of no one else. Have you observed any gradual alteration in Papa? I had observed it, and often wondered whether she had too. I must have shown as much now in my face, for her eyes were in a moment cast down. Cast means throw, but to cast down your eyes means to look down. And I saw tears in them. Tell me, what is it? She said in a low voice. I think... Shall I be quite plain, Agnes? Liking him so much? Yes, she said. I think he does himself no good by the habit that has increased upon him since I first came here. He is often very nervous, or I fancy so. Her father likes to drink a lot of alcohol, and I think that's what he's talking about. But that would be a very impolite thing to say directly to Agnes. So he's saying it in a very indirect way. It is not fancy, said Agnes, shaking her head. His hand trembles, his speech is not plain, and his eyes look wild. I have remarked that at those times and when he is least like himself, he is most certain to be wanted on some business. Maybe they're not talking about alcohol. It's just that he seems very nervous recently. And Agnes says it's not fancy, meaning it's not that he's in love, because his wife passed away a very long time ago. So maybe Agnes was thinking that he found a love interest. It's not fancy, said Agnes, shaking her head. His hand trembles. His speech is not plain, and his eyes look wild. He is least like himself. He is most certain to be wanted on some business. By Uriah? Said Agnes. Yes. And the sense of being unfit for it, or of not having understood it, or of having shown his condition in spite of himself, seems to make him so uneasy that the next day he is worse, and the next day worse. And so he becomes jaded and haggard. Mr. Wakefield is a lawyer, and Uriah is his assistant. Uriah is a very creepy person who nobody likes. Everyone is very creeped out by Uriah Heep. And so they're speculating. Speculating means like guessing or thinking, trying to understand what is happening. They're speculating that maybe they have some business together, some kind of client, and it's a very important, horrible thing. And to be jaded means to not be shocked by shocking things anymore. To not be impressed by impressive things anymore. Well, let's take a look at the official definition of jaded. Well, let's take a look at the Google definition. I'm not so sure that's the official definition, but it's... well, that's funny because the definition that they get here is fatigued by overwork. But I've never seen that. I've never seen the word jaded used in that way. The way that I've seen it is the second one, which is made dull, apathetic, or cynical by experience or by having seen too much of something. So you're no longer surprised or excited by anything. You say, big deal. Hey, look at my new car. Big deal. Who cares about new cars? I don't care about new cars. But actually, I think that it's the first definition that fits best here. Fatigued by overwork. I've never seen jaded used like that, though. And to be haggard means like you don't take care of your appearance, so you look ugly. Your hair is messy. Your clothes are messy. You didn't shave. I didn't shave. I'm a little bit haggard today. Do not be alarmed by what I say, Agnes, but in this state I saw him only the other evening, lay down his head on his desk, and shed tears like a child. Her hand passed softly before my lips, while I was yet speaking, and in a moment she had met her father at the door of the room, and was hanging on his shoulder. So as they were talking about this, the father came to the door, and Agnes put her hand over Davy's mouth so that he would stop talking. And she ran over to him, and she hugged him. The expression of her face, as they both looked towards me, I felt to be very much touching. That word touching means like touched my heart. Like almost like make me cry, give me very strong emotions. So when he saw them together and they were both looking at him from the door, it made him want to cry. That scene touched his heart. It was touching. You can just say it was touching. There was such a deep fondness for him. Fondness means to enjoy something or to like something. So when you say there was such a deep fondness for him, I don't know who they're talking about. The daughter, Davy, both? It's not clear. But there was a lot of love for this man. And gratitude to him for all of his love and care. He's talking about the expression on Agnes's face. So in her face, you could see a lot of love and gratitude for how well he cares for her. And there was such a fervent appeal to me to deal tenderly by him, even in my inmost thoughts, and to let no harsh construction find any place against him. So, they're witnessing the father act out very strange behavior. And he drinks a lot of alcohol. And the temptation is to maybe think that something bad is happening, but it just seems impossible to have that kind of thought about him because he's so kind, he's so nice. She was at once so proud of him and devoted to him, yet so compassionate and sorry and so reliant upon me to be so too, that nothing she could have said would have expressed more to me or moved me more. Well, what he's saying is the expression that he sees on her face says much more than any word could ever say about how she feels about her father. We were to drink tea at the doctor's. We went there, the usual hour, and round the study fireside found the doctor and his young wife and her mother, the doctor, who made much of my going away as if I were going to China, received me as an honored guest, and called for a log of wood to be thrown on the fire, that he might see the face of his old pupil reddening in the blaze. I shall not see many more new faces in Trotwood's stead. When you say in something's stead, that means in its place. Like, I want ice cream instead of cake. That means I want ice cream in place of cake. Because you probably know that word stead, just in that word instead, but you can use it without the word in. Or you can separate the word in. Okay, so here it says, I shall not see many more new faces in Trotwood's stead. Meaning after Trotwood leaves, after Davy leaves, I shall not see many new faces. Because I guess he's saying I'm old. Wakefield, said the doctor, warming his hands, I'm getting lazy and want ease. I shall relinquish all my young people in another 6 months and lead a quieter life. So remember, we've already seen that word relinquish. It means to release, to let go. So the doctor who owns this school is saying, I shall let go of my young students. I shall relinquish my students. I shall release them in another 6 months and lead a quieter life. He wants to retire. You have said so any time these 10 years, Doctor, Mr. Wakefield answered. But now I mean to do it, returned the doctor. So he's saying, you've been saying that for 10 years. Shut up. You've been saying that for 10 years. And he says, no, this time I really do want to do that. My first master will succeed me. I'm in earnest at last. So remember, in earnest means like desperate or in a hurry or enthusiastic about something. Earlier, we were using it to mean to be in love, but here it really means I'm desperate to do it. I really want to do it. So you soon have to arrange our contracts and to bind us firmly to them like a couple of knaves. And to take care, said Mr. Wakefield, that you're not imposed on, eh? As you certainly would be in any contract you should make for yourself. Well, I'm ready. There are worse tasks than that in my calling. I shall have nothing to think of then, said the doctor with a smile, but my dictionary and this other contract bargain, Annie. That's his wife. That's his young wife. As Mr. Wakefield glanced towards her, sitting at the tea table by Agnes, she seemed to me to avoid his look with such unwonted hesitation and timidity that his attention became fixed upon her, as if something were suggested to his thoughts. There's a post come in from India, I observe, he said, after a short time. Now, post here just means a letter. So there's a letter from India. And in an earlier chapter, because Dr. Strong, the headmaster, the owner of the school, is an old man, but he's married to a very young, beautiful woman who's maybe, I don't know, I don't remember her age. It's like 20. She's very pretty. And there was a scene in the book where there was this man who was her, I think they said her cousin or her friend, but they were very close together. And it was obvious to everyone that they were having a love affair, except Dr. Strong. Dr. Strong is a very, very kind and nice man, and he could not see it. But it was so obvious to everyone, and it was such a scandal in the town, that they forced this man to leave the town and to make sure that he would never come back. And they sent him away to India. And so they had a big party, a big going away party for him. And the young lady, Dr. Strong's wife, she was very depressed but she couldn't show it because her husband was right there. Her old man husband was right there. So she had to pretend that she was feeling sick. And so that night, he went away to India, supposedly forever. And now Dr. Strong is saying, "Oh, there's a letter from India, I observe," he said. He has no idea. He has no idea of this affair. By the by, that means by the way. That's another way of saying by the way, by the by. "And letters from Mr. Jack Maldon," said the doctor. Jack Maldon, I think, is the name of his wife's boyfriend. "Indeed, poor dear Jack," said Mrs. Markleham, shaking her head. "That trying climate." We've had the word trying before, meaning difficult. So this doesn't mean trying attempt. This means difficult. The trying climate, the difficult climate. It's very hot in India. "Like living," they tell me, "on a sand heap underneath a burning glass." He looked strong. But he wasn't, my dear doctor. It was his spirit, not his constitution, that he ventured on so boldly. "Annie, my dear, I'm sure you must perfectly recollect that your cousin never was strong." Yeah, so they said he was... Maybe they really were cousins. I have no idea, but at least they were saying that he was her cousin. They were lovers, though. "Not what can be called robust, you know," said Mrs. Markleham, with emphasis on looking round upon us generally. "From time to time, when my daughter and himself were children together and walking about arm in arm the livelong day," the livelong day kind of means like every day. Annie thus addressed me, made no reply. "Do I gather from what you say, ma'am, that Mr. Maldon is ill?" asked Mr. Wickfield. "Ill," replied the old soldier. "My dear, he's all sorts of things." "Except well?" said Mr. Wickfield. "Except well indeed," said the old soldier. "He had dreadful strokes of sun, no doubt, and jungle fevers, and agues." Okay, we have to look up that word. By the way, when they say the old soldier, they're referring to the mother-in-law, which is Mrs... What was her name? Do they show it here? Mrs. Markleham or something like that? Yeah, Markleham. So when you hear the old soldier, they're talking about Mrs. Markleham. I forget. It's kind of a joke why they call her that. But I forget the reason why. They explained it earlier in the book. What was that word? Ague. A-G-U-E. Malaria. It's some other illness involving fever and shivering. So it's a type of disease like malaria. But they also say it's archaic. It's not used anymore. "And every kind of thing you can mention. As to his liver," said the old soldier resignedly. That's the mother-in-law, the old soldier. "That, of course, he gave up altogether when he first went out." So the liver, if you drink a lot of alcohol, the liver is an organ that you could damage. So the mother-in-law is saying, and of course his liver, well, of course that's in no good condition because he's gone and we know he's always drinking over there. "Does he say all of this?" asked Mr. Wickfield. "Say, my dear sir," returned Mrs. Markleham, shaking her head and her fan. "You know my poor Jack Maldon, when you ask that question. Say? Not he. You might drag him at the heels of the 4 wild horses first." "Mamma," said Mrs. Strong. So Mr. Wickfield said, "And he told you all of this in the letters?" And the mother-in-law says, "Oh, he would never tell us that sort of thing." So really, the mother-in-law is saying how sick and what a horrible time he's having over there. But he's never said that. So it's just her imagination, I think. "Annie, my dear," Annie is the young wife who was Jack Maldon's lover. "Annie, my dear," returned her mother, Once for all, I must really beg you that you will not interfere with me unless it is to confirm what I say. You know as well as I do that your cousin Malden would be dragged at the heels by any number of wild horses. Why should I confine myself to 4? By the way, there's an expression, wild horses couldn't drag it out of me. That means you'll never make me tell you this thing. So, oh, come on, tell me the secret. Nope, wild horses couldn't drag it out of me. So that's really an expression meaning I'll never tell you. And she's using that expression, and that's, you could still use that today. People say that all the time. Wild horses couldn't drag it out of me. And that's what the mother said. Let's see. Let's go back and read that. You might drag him at the heels of 4 wild horses first. You see, so she's saying you could attach him to 4 wild horses and make them run, but he'll never tell you. He'll never mention it. But that's a very rude thing to say. That's why the daughter, the lover, says, Mama, says Mrs. Strong. She's offended that, number one, her mother is talking in a very rude way in front of company. But also she's probably very offended that she would create this image of someone who she loves very much. And then her mother says, don't interrupt me. I tell you all the time, don't interrupt me. Annie, my dear, returned her mother, once and for all, I really must beg that you will not interfere with me unless it is to confirm what I say. So only say something if you're agreeing with me. You know as well as I do that your cousin Malden would be dragged at the heels of any number of wild horses. Why should I confine myself to 4? I won't confine myself to 4. 8, 16, 2 and 30, rather than say anything calculated to overturn the doctor's plans. Wickfield's plans? Said the doctor, stroking his face and looking penitently at his advisor. To be penitent means to be ashamed. But I'm a little bit confused about what's happening here. When you feel penitent, you feel sorry for something that you've done, and you want forgiveness. Wickfield's plans, said the doctor, stroking his face and looking penitently at his advisor. So Wickfield is looking at or Dr. Strong is looking at Wickfield and he feels a little bit ashamed, like, I'm sorry. So let's find out what the plans are. That is to say, our joint plans for him. I said myself abroad or at home. And I said, added Mr. Wickfield gravely, abroad. I was the means of sending him abroad. It's my responsibility. Oh, responsibility, said the old soldier. Everything was done for the best, my dear Wickfield. My dear Mr. Wickfield. Everything was done for the kindest and best, we know. But if the dear fellow can't live there, he can't live there. And if he can't live there, he'll die there sooner than he'll overturn the doctor's plans. I know him, said the old soldier, fanning herself in a sort of calm prophetic agony, and I know he'll die there sooner than he'll overturn the doctor's plans. I don't know what those plans are. Let's see if they tell us. Well, well, ma'am, said the doctor cheerfully, I am not bigoted to my plans, and I can overturn them myself. I can substitute some other plans. If Mr. Jack Malden comes home on account of ill health, he must not be allowed to go back. So Dr. Strong is paying for Jack Malden to return from India. But that means that he will probably be united with Dr. Strong's wife again, and they'll continue their affair. And everybody in that room knows that, except for Dr. Strong, because he doesn't understand this dynamic. He must not be allowed to go back. We must endeavor to make some more suitable and fortunate provision for him in this country. Mrs. Markleham was so overcome by this generous speech, which I need not say she had not at all expected or led up to, that she could only tell the doctor it was like himself, and go several times through the operation of kissing the sticks of her fan and then tapping his hand with it. So she was very excited by this. The mother-in-law was very excited that he was sending Jack Maldon back to England, and she was showing how happy she was. After which she gently shied her daughter. To shide someone is to push them aside a little bit, or to criticize them. So let's see what happened. For not being more demonstrative with such kindness, were showered. So the mother says, "Oh, you're so wonderful for sending back my nephew." And then she says to her daughter, which is the also the wife of Dr. Strong, "You should be nicer to him. You should tell him how kind he is." That's how she chided him. For her sake, or her old playfellow, and entertained us with some particulars concerning other deserving members of her family, whom it was desirable to set on their deserving legs. All this time her daughter Annie never once spoke or lifted up her eyes. All this time Mr. Wickfield had his glance upon her as he sat by his own daughter's side. So everybody's looking at Annie, the young wife, because everyone knows that when Jack Maldon comes back, they'll continue their love affair, which is pretty horrible because Dr. Strong is such a nice person and so generous and so kind and never thinks anything bad about anyone, that it seems like the mother and the daughter are really taking advantage of him. I'm not sure if the mother knows that I don't remember if the mother-in-law knows that her daughter is having an affair with him or not. It seems like she doesn't, otherwise she probably wouldn't want this to happen. So maybe it's Dr. Strong and the mother-in-law have no idea that there's an affair. The mother-in-law because she's too stupid, and Dr. Strong because he's just so nice. Mr. Wickfield had his glance upon her as he sat by his own daughter's side. It appeared to me that he never thought of being observed by anyone, but was so intent upon her. So Mr. Wickfield was really concentrating, looking at her while they were having this conversation. That's what it means when he says he was so intent upon her. He was really concentrating on her, looking right at her. And upon his own thoughts in connection with her, as to be quite absorbed. So he was really concentrating, not thinking about anything else. He now asked what Mr. Jack Maldon had actually written in reference to himself, and to whom he had written. "Why, here," said Mrs. Markleham, taking the letter from the chimney-piece above the doctor's head. "The dear fellow says to the doctor himself—" Where is it? Oh. "I'm sorry to inform you that my health is suffering severely, and that I fear I may be reduced to the necessity of returning home for a time, as the only hope of restoration." That's pretty plain, poor fellow. His only hope of restoration. But Annie's letter is plainer still. "Annie, show me the letter again." "Not now, Mamma," she pleaded in a low tone. Oh, so she said it like this. "Not now, Mamma." "My dear, you absolutely are, on some subjects, one of the most ridiculous persons in the world," returned her mother, "and perhaps the most unnatural to the claims of your own family. We never should have heard of the letter at all, I believe, unless I had asked for it myself. Do you call that confidence, my love, towards Dr. Strong? I'm surprised. You ought to know better." The letter was reluctantly produced. When you do something reluctantly, you do it, but you're not happy about it. You don't want to do it. Somebody convinced you or forced you to do it, and you really don't. So she was like, "Here." As I handed it to the old lady, I saw how the unwilling hand from which I took it trembled. So she was going here, but she was also nervous, so her hand was trembling like this. This is trembling, a trembling hand. Now let us see, said Mrs. Markleham, putting her glass to her eye. Where is this passage? The remembrance of old times, my dearest Annie, and so forth. It's not there. The amiable old proctor. Amiable means friendly, and I think when they're saying old proctor, he's referring to her husband, Dr. Strong, which is a pretty disrespectful way to refer to Dr. Strong, I think. Even though, they're saying friendly old teacher, but he's not a friendly old teacher, exam giver. It's her husband. So that's why it's kind of disrespectful. Who's he? Dear me, Annie, how illegibly your cousin Malden writes. Illegible means you can't read it. So how illegible your cousin writes. It means it's very hard to read your cousin's writing. And how stupid I am. Doctor, of course. Ah, amiable indeed. Friendly, yes. Yes, absolutely. He is friendly. Here she left off to kiss her fan again. So fan, that's, to cool yourself. So the mother-in-law is holding a fan, and then she kissed it. And to shake it at the doctor, who was looking at us again in a state of placid satisfaction. The doctor has no idea. He's just too friendly, too nice. He never thinks bad things about people or their intentions. What did I say just now? That I have undergone so much in this distant place as to have decided to leave it and all its hazards. Hazards are like dangerous things. So I've decided to leave this land full of dangerous things, on sick leave, if I can, on total resignation, if that is not to be obtained. What I have endured. So he's trying to get a sick leave. He's trying to get permission to leave temporarily because he's sick. That's what sick leave means. Even now, that's what sick leave means. But most of the time it's used in the military. I suppose it could also be used at work. Somebody's on sick leave, that means they're probably in the hospital for a few weeks, but they have permission from their job to do it. So he's saying, I'm going to try to get sick leave to return home for a while to recover, but if they don't give it to me, then I will just quit. I'm not staying there. I don't remember if he joined a company or if he joined the military. I forget. What I have endured and do endure here is unsupportable, and but for the promptitude of the best of creatures, said Mrs. Markleham, telegraphing the doctor as before, and refolding the letter, it would be insupportable to me to think of. Mr. Wickfield said not one word, though the old lady looked to him as if for commentary on this intelligence. So the mother-in-law is like, well, what do you think? But Mr. Wickfield knows what's happening. Jack Malden wants to come back from India to continue his love affair with her daughter, but she's already married to Dr. Strong. So this is really embarrassing. The mother-in-law going on about this, because everybody in the room except for Dr. Strong knows what's happening. But sat severely silent. So Mr. Wickfield doesn't know what to say. He's just sitting there. He can't say anything. With his eyes fixed on the ground. Long after the subject was dismissed and other topics occupied us, he remained so, seldom raising his eyes, unless to rest them for a moment, with a thoughtful frown upon the doctor or his wife, or both. So a frown, in case you don't know, is the opposite of a smile. He feels very sad. And sometimes he looks at the wife, and sometimes he looks at old Dr. Strong, the husband, and he feels very bad about this whole thing. The doctor was very fond of music. And again, to be fond of something means that you like it. So that kind of means the doctor loved music. Agnes sang with great sweetness and expression, and so did Mrs. Strong. They sang together and played duets together, and we had quite a little concert, but I remarked two things. First, that though Annie soon recovered her composure, your composure is how you appear to other people. So when the mother-in-law was talking about the cousin coming back and reading little passages from Annie's letter, it was really embarrassing, and she was nervous and she was ashamed. So her body language, what you could see from her was that she was very nervous, depressed, confused. But now they're saying that she recovered her composure, which means she now appeared, I don't know what was happening in her head, but now she appeared to be happy. She looked happy. Annie soon recovered her composure and was quite herself. There was a blank between her and Mr. Wickfield which separated them wholly from each other. Secondly, that Mr. Wickfield seemed to dislike the intimacy between her and Agnes, and to watch it with uneasiness. So Mr. Wickfield was very uncomfortable that his daughter, Agnes, seemed to be extremely good friends with Annie, because, of course, Mr. Wickfield has a very low opinion of Annie, because she's married to this very nice man, and she's having a love affair with her cousin, Jack Maldon, or her supposed cousin, Jack Maldon, in India. So he doesn't like that his daughter is very good friends with her. Maybe he thinks that she's a bad influence. And now I must confess the recollection of what I had seen on that night, when Mr. Maldon went away, first began to return upon me with a meaning it had never had, and to trouble me. The innocent beauty of her face was not as innocent to me as it had been. I mistrusted the natural grace and charm of her manner, and when I looked at Agnes by her side, and thought how good and true Agnes was, suspicions arose within me that it was an ill-assorted friendship. So when that night that Jack Maldon went away, Davy had to return to Dr. Strong's house after the party. They had a big going-away party. Everyone went home. But Davy had to return, I think because Agnes forgot something, and he went to get it. And I don't remember what he saw, but he saw something very strange that night. Like Annie, the young wife, was crying in a strange way. Some kind of uncomfortable situation, but I don't remember exactly. And now he's thinking back, and she's a very beautiful young lady. And I think at that moment, when he was a young boy, because that was like 8 years ago, and he was maybe 10 at the time, when it happened at the time, he knew that something was wrong, but, he just thought that she was a pretty woman. And now he's looking back at that, remembering that incident when he returned to the house, and now he's seeing it in a different way, like she's an evil person. And he suddenly feels very uncomfortable that Agnes is friends with her. She was so happy in it herself, however, and the other was so happy too, that they made the evening fly away as if it were but an hour. It closed in an incident which I well remember. They were taking leave of each other. That means they were saying goodbye. And Agnes was going to embrace her and kiss her, when Mr. Wickfield stepped between them, as if by accident, and drew Agnes quickly away. So they were about to say goodbye and hug and kiss, but Mr. Wickfield, Agnes's father, pretended to accidentally come between them, and he pushed his daughter away. He doesn't want his daughter near Annie. Then I saw as though all the intervening time had been cancelled, and I were still standing in the doorway on the night of the departure, the expression of that night in the face of Mrs. Strong as it confronted his. I cannot say with an impression what an impression this made upon me, or how impossible I found it, when I thought of her afterwards, to separate her from this look, and remember her face in its innocent loveliness again. It haunted me when I got home. I seemed to have left the doctor's roof with a dark cloud lowering on it. The reverence that I had for his gray head, was mingled with commiseration for his faith in those who were treacherous to him, and with resentment against those who injured him. So Davy really respects and loves Dr. Strong, who's been his teacher, or who has been responsible for his education for the last several years. So he has a strong love and admiration and respect for Dr. Strong, but also he's kind of hates Dr. Strong because he trusts people too much, and he gives too much kindness to people when they don't deserve it. The impending shadow of a great affliction and a great disgrace that had no distinct form in it yet fell like a stain upon the quiet place where I had worked and played as a boy, and did it a cruel wrong. I had no pleasure in thinking any more of the grave old broad-leaved aloe trees, which remain shut up in themselves 100 years together, and of the trim, smooth grass plot, and the stone urns, and the doctor's walk, and the congenial sound of the cathedral bell hovering over them all. It was as if the tranquil sanctuary of my boyhood had been sacked before my face, and its peace and honor given to the winds. So now all these places that he should remember and love look ugly to him. And it's partly because of this situation with Dr. Strong and his wife and Jack Maldon returning from India and the mother-in-law. But morning brought with it my parting from the old house which Agnes had filled with her influence, and that occupied my mind sufficiently. I should be there again soon, no doubt. I might sleep again, perhaps often, in my old room. But the days of my inhabiting there were gone, and the old time was past. I was heavier at heart when I packed up such of my books and clothes as still remained there to be sent to Dover, than I cared to show to Uriah Heep, who was so officious to help me that I uncharitably thought him mighty glad that I was going. So Uriah Heep was in there helping Davy pack. So it was hard for him to be sentimental, to think about leaving, or to feel sad, because he didn't want to do it in the presence of Uriah Heep, who's a really weird person and makes everybody feel uncomfortable. And Davy was even thinking, why is he in here helping me? Is he happy that I'm leaving? I got away from Agnes and her father somehow with an indifferent show of being very manly, and took my seat upon the box of the London coach. So a coach is like the 200-year-old bus. It's a big, not very big. I think maybe like probably 8 people could fit in a coach. I don't know. But that's kind of like the public transport, or the, not public, but mass transport of the time would be a carriage pulled by a horse. But maybe 8 people. Let's look. How many people could fit in a typical coach? How many people could fit in a typical coach? I better put horse-drawn coach. They still use coach to talk about buses or trucks or things like that. So, horse-drawn. Well, the biggest ones could hold 12 people. But I think usually, I mean, at least when you see it in movies, it's usually like 6 or 8 people. Not very many. I took my seat upon the box of the London coach. I was so often and forgiving, I was so softened and forgiving going through the town that I had half a mind to nod to my old enemy the butcher. Well, it's really funny because in the last chapter, there's this butcher, this young butcher in town. He hates the students of the school. I don't know why, but he hates them. And he's always insulting them. So they're always having physical fights. And the several times that Davy tried to fight him, he got his butt kicked, frankly. But then it's interesting because I think at the end of the chapter, he goes to this ball. It's his first adult ball where he's in love with the beautiful Miss Larkin, who's 30. He's 17 and she's 30. And he almost tells her, he almost confesses how much he loves her, but he didn't, which was a good thing, because a few weeks later, he found out that she was marrying an old man. And he was really angry, and he decided to go down to the butcher. He needed to release his aggression or his anger, and he decided to fight the butcher. And this time, he kicked the butcher's butt. And I think that's how the last chapter ended. So Davy's leaving the town. He's on the London coach. And I was so softened and forgiving going through the town that I had half a mind to nod my head to my old enemy, the butcher. So he even wanted to say goodbye to the butcher as he was leaving because he felt so sentimental about leaving his old town. And throw him 5 shillings to drink. But he looked such a very obdurate butcher as he stood scraping the great block in the shop. We have to look up this word, obdurate. Not that I think you should ever use this word. Obdurate. I've never heard that in my life. Obdurate. Stubbornly refusing to change one's opinion or course of action. Sounds like obstinate. I think these days we would use the word like obstinate. He stood scraping the great block in the shop, and moreover, his appearance was so little improved by the loss of a front tooth which I had knocked out that I thought it best to make no advances. The main object on my mind, I remember, when we got fairly on the road, was to appear as old as possible to the coachman, and to speak extremely gruff. Gruff, let's see, I don't know how to describe that. I'm just going to look it up. Gruff. I mean, when I hear the word gruff, I think of an appearance, but Davy's using it to talk about the way he sounds. So let's see. Of a voice rough and low in pitch. So to sound very old and intimidating. The latter point, but you have to remember when Davy arrived, when he was young, he was a runaway and being abused, and people took advantage of him all the way there. So I think now he realizes that, and this is his first time out as an independent young adult, and he wants to appear like, you can't do that to me again. The latter point I achieved a great personal inconvenience, but I stuck to it because I felt it was a grown-up sort of thing. You are going through, sir? Said the coachman. Yes, William, I said condescendingly. I knew him. I am going to London. I shall go down into Suffolk afterwards. Shooting, sir? Said the coachman. He knew as well as I did that it was just as likely at that time of year. I was going down there whaling, but I felt complimented too. So the person driving the coach, and he knows Davy and Davy knows him, but they're going through this little game where the coachman, the driver, is treating him with a lot of respect and saying, oh, are you going shooting? Which sounds like a very fancy, rich person, mature thing to do. But really the coachman knew that Davy was going to see Peggotty and go whaling. But he felt flattered. He felt that made him feel good that the coachman said that. I don't know, said, pretending to be undecided, whether I shall take a shot or not. Birds is got wery shy, I'm told, said William. So I understand, said I. Is Suffolk your county, sir? Asked William. Yes, I said, with some importance. Suffolk's my county. I'm told the dumplings is uncommon fine down there, said William. I was not aware of it myself, but I felt it necessary to uphold the institutions of my county, to evince a familiarity with them, so I shook my head, as much to say, I believe you. And the punches, said William. There's cattle, a Suffolk punch, when he's a good un, is worth his weight in gold. Did you ever breed any Suffolk punches yourself, sir? No, I said, not exactly. Here's a gentleman behind me. I'll pound it, said William, as has bred 'em by wholesale. So, this is a weird conversation, but the coachman is asking, have you ever raised a certain type of bull or cow? And Davy says no. But he says, there's a man behind me. I'll pound it. I'm not sure why he's saying it. As bred 'em by wholesale. Maybe I'll pound it means like I bet. There's a man behind me, I bet, who has experience with these kinds of cows, selling them wholesale, which means as like a business. The gentleman spoken of was a gentleman with a very unpromising squint. This is squinting. So unpromising means maybe he has a very bad future because of this squint. And a prominent chin, that means a big chin, a big long chin. Who had a tall white hat on with a narrow flat brim. The brim is like the outer edge of a hat. And whose close-fitting drab trousers seemed to button all the way up outside his legs from his boots to his hips. His chin was cocked over the coachman's shoulder. So the coachman's driving, and the man he's describing has his chin over the coachman's shoulder. Maybe not touching it, but over, like looking where they're going forward. So near to me that his breath quite tickled the back of my head. And so Davy must be sitting in front with the coachman, and the person in back, the squinter, is over like this, and Davy can feel his breath. As I looked at him, he leered at the leaders with the eye with which he didn't squint in a very knowing manner. So this man, I think he's observing how the horses are being manipulated or walking. Like he really knows what to look for. Like it's his business. And maybe that's why the driver said this thing about, I bet he raises cows. Ain't I what? Said the gentleman behind. Bred them Suffolk punches by wholesale. I should think so, said the gentleman. There ain't no sort of horse that I ain't bred. Oh, so they're actually talking about horses. I thought they were talking about cows for some reason. I don't know why. So yeah, the man says, yeah, that's what I do. I breed horses. That means I make horses. Breed means reproduce. So I breed horses means I produce horses and then I sell them. There ain't no sort of horse that I ain't bred, and no sort of dorg. There are some accents in English that put R's in weird places. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but for example, there are parts of the United States where instead of saying wash, they will say wersh. Or instead of saying toilet, they'll say turlet. It's kind of funny, but they're doing that here. He's saying dog, but he's calling it a dorg. Horses and dorgs is some men's fancy. They're wittles. Wittles is victuals, which means food. They're wittles and drink to me, lodging, wife, and children, reading, writing, and arithmetic, snuff, tobacco, and sleep. He's saying, I breed horses and dogs. And that's for some people, they're a fancy for some people. Some people love horses and dogs, and they pay a lot of money for them. But they're victuals. Victuals means food, and you can still even use that word, victuals. Don't say whittles, though. They're victuals and drink to me, so they're food and drink to me. That's how he makes his money. Lodging, that means a place to stay. A wife and children. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Snuff. And then here we have that R again that shouldn't be there. Instead of saying tobacco, he says tobacco. Tobacco. That could happen in the U.S. too, but I think a long time ago. I don't know if anybody would do that now. I would do it just because it sounds funny. I need some tobacco. It sounds funny. I like it. That ain't a sort of man to see sitting behind a coach box, is it, though? Said William in my ear as he handled the reins. The reins are the ropes that are connected to the horses, that control the horses. I construed this remark into an indication of a wish that he should have my place, so I blushingly offered to resign it. Well, if you don't mind, sir, said William, I think it would be more correct. I've always considered this as the first fall I had in life. When I booked my place at the coach office, I had box seat written against the entry, and had given the bookkeeper half a crown. I was got up in a special greatcoat and a shawl expressly to do honor to that distinguished eminence. I had no idea that was like a special place to sit, because it sounds like he's sitting outside of the coach in the front with the coachman, with the man who's driving the horses, and that doesn't seem like the VIP spot. But the driver has convinced Davy to give up this very special spot for the man behind them. Oh, maybe the coach isn't covered, so maybe sitting in front is the best because you can have the best view. But I always think of a coach as being covered. So they convinced Davy to give up his place. And Davy says, this is like the first failure in my adult life because I paid for that seat. And I was very proud to look at the ticket where it says box seat. And I even got a special blanket to keep me warm. And I gave it up to this other guy. Poor Davy. I was got up in a special greatcoat and a shawl expressly to do honor to that distinguished eminence, had glorified myself upon it a good deal, and had felt that I was a credit to the coach. And here, in the very first stage, I was supplanted by a shabby man with a squint, who had no other merit than smelling like livery stables. Livery stables, that's where the horses live. So the man smelled like where the horses live, like horse poo and hay. who had no other merit than smelling like livery stables. And being able to walk across me more like a fly than a human being while the horses were at a canter. A distrust of myself which has often beset me in life on small occasions, when it would have been better away, was assuredly not stopped in its growth by this little incident outside the Canterbury coach. It was in vain to take refuge in the gruffness of speech. I spoke from the pit of my stomach for the rest of the journey. Oh, poor Davy, that really destroyed his confidence. So he didn't try to speak in an intimidating way anymore. He spoke out of the nervousness of his stomach for the rest of the journey. But I felt completely extinguished and dreadfully young. It was curious and interesting, nevertheless, to be sitting up there behind the four horses, well educated, well dressed, with plenty of money in my pocket, and to look out for the places where I had slept on my weary journey. So he's taking the road back. He's just taking the same route back that he took when he walked to London. In the beginning of the book, he was in London all alone, a little boy, being treated very badly, being forced to work in this place that was very horrible. And he decided to run away to his aunt. And right before he ran away, he was robbed of all of his money, and he had to take whatever clothes he had and sell them so that he could walk the 7 days to his aunt in, is she in Dover? I think she's in Dover, but it took a week. And now he's taking this coach back on the very same road that he walked 10 years ago. And so he's looking out for all of the places that he encountered along the way. Okay, I have to take a 1-minute break, a little bathroom break. Too much information, I know. And I will be right back. So just give me 1 minute and we will return. Because I was just looking and there's several more pages and I can't wait several more pages. Okay. Thank you for waiting. Sorry about that. All right, let's keep going. Again, if you have comments or questions while we're doing this, it makes it much more interesting if you ask questions or make comments. That's the whole point of this. So I'm happy to just keep reading and only picking words or phrases that I think are interesting, but I really do encourage you to ask questions. Okay. So Davy's going down this road and now he has a lot of money and he's got his whole future in front of him, and he's taking that same road that he walked 10 years ago as a little boy with no money, no food, and desperate. And he's looking out at all the places, trying to remember all of the things that happened on his way to see his aunt. You know, I lost my spot. Now I have to see where I left off. It was curious and interesting, nevertheless, to be sitting up there behind 4 horses, well educated, well dressed, and with plenty of money in my pocket, and to look out for the places where I had slept on my weary journey. Weary means sad and tired, giving up. I had abundant occupation for my thoughts in every conspicuous landmark on the road. When I looked down at the trampers who we passed, and saw that well-remembered style of face turned up. I felt as if the tinker's blackened hand were in the bosom of my shirt again, when we clattered through the narrow street of Chatham, and I caught a glimpse in passing of the lane where the old monster lived who had bought my jacket. I stretched my neck eagerly to look for the place where I had sat in the sun and in the shade waiting for my money, when we came at last within a stage of London, and passed the veritable Salem house where Mr. Creakle had laid about him with a heavy hand. When Davy's mother was still alive, she remarried. I can't talk anymore. I'm getting tired, I guess. She remarried a very horrible man, and that man hated Davy. And the first thing that he did, that's Mr. Murdstone. He will come back later in the story. Mr. Murdstone hated Davy. So the first thing that he did was send Davy away to school. And he sent him to the worst school imaginable, which was Salem House. And at Salem House, they used to abuse and beat the children every day. So on this stagecoach, they're passing Salem House, and Davy is remembering Mr. Creakle. That's the man who used to run Salem House, and how they used to beat him. That's what it means with a heavy hand. To have a heavy hand means you like to hit people. I would have given all I had for lawful permission to get down and thrash him. So Davy's saying, I would have given all my money if it weren't against the law, if I could get permission from the law to get down and thrash him, which means beat him, hurt him. And let all the boys out like so many caged sparrows, so that the school still exists, and Mr. Creakle is probably still there, and Davy has this fantasy of opening the doors, like opening the doors of a bird cage and letting all the boys out and freeing them like free birds. We went to the Golden Cross at Charing Cross, and then a moldy sort of establishment in a close neighborhood. A waiter showed me into the coffee room, and a chambermaid introduced me to my small bedchamber, which smelt like a hackney coach and was shut up like a family vault. I was still painfully conscious of my youth, for nobody stood in any awe of me at all. Well, you know that word awesome? That comes from the word awe, which means surprise or amazement. And so when he says nobody stood in awe of me, it means nobody was impressed by me. So Davy thought he was very well dressed and looked very handsome and very mature, but nobody noticed. Nobody cared. Nobody stood in awe of him. Nobody thought that was awesome. The chambermaid, being utterly indifferent to my opinions on any subject, and the waiter being familiar with me and offering advice to my inexperience. To be familiar with someone in this sense means it was very inappropriate for the waiter to give Davy any kind of advice. So it's kind of disrespectful, but the waiter was giving him advice about how to act. That's what it means by being familiar here, I think. Well now, said the waiter in a tone of confidence, what would you like for dinner? Young gentleman likes poultry in general. Have a fowl. So it's like the waiter is suggesting things from him because he's implying that Davy doesn't know what to order. Ain't you? Said the waiter. Young gentlemen and generally tired of beef and mutton. Have a veal cutlet. So that's veal. Veal is a baby cow. Veal cutlet, a small piece of veal. I assented to this proposal in default of being able to suggest anything. Do you care for taters? Oh, now this is funny, because do you remember earlier we were talking about derg and tobacco, and I think there was another word where there was an R, and it shouldn't have been there. This is one time when you will hear it very often. People love to call potatoes. You know, instead of saying potatoes, in some accents, it would sound like potatoes. That sounds very funny. If you say potatoes, people will laugh. But it's very common that people still say taters. I would say it, but maybe in a joking way. Give me some taters. I love taters. But that's what he's offering. He's offering potatoes. So it goes from potatoes to potatoes to taters. I commanded him, in my deepest voice, to order a veal cutlet and potatoes. So Davy's saying it in the normal way. And all things fitting, to inquire at the bar if there were any letters for Trotwood Copperfield, Esquire. Which I knew there were not, and couldn't be, but thought it manly to appear to expect. He soon came back to say that there were none, at which I was much surprised. There were no letters for me? And began to lay the cloth for my dinner in a box by the fire. While he was so engaged, he asked me what I would take with it, and on my replying half a pint of sherry, thought it a favorable opportunity, I'm afraid, to extract that measure of wine from the stale leavings at the bottom of several decanters. I am of this opinion because while I was reading the newspaper, I observed him behind the low wooden partition, which was his private apartment, very busy pouring out a number of those vessels into one, like a chemist and a druggist making up a prescription. So Davy ordered some wine, and instead of giving, because he's young, the waiter thought that he could take advantage of Davy, like Davy wouldn't know the difference, and he gave him just like, maybe they had like several bottles of wine, but the bottom where there are like little things floating in it, and not very good quality, like the garbage, leftover garbage. And so the waiter was behind the bar pouring all the garbage into one glass to give it to Davy. Probably either because he thought he wouldn't know the difference, or he's too young and not brave enough to protest or say anything about it. When the wine came to, I thought it flat, and it certainly had more English crumbs in it than were to be expected in a foreign wine in anything like a pure state. But I was bashful. Bashful means shy. But I was bashful enough to drink it and say nothing. Being then in a pleasant frame of mind, from which I infer that poisoning is not always disagreeable in some stages of the process, I resolved to go to the play. It was Covent Garden Theatre that I chose. Oh, so are they already in London? I thought that they were on the way still. I guess not. And there from back, let me read. I resolved to go to the play. It was Covent Garden Theatre that I chose, and there, from the back of a center box, I saw Julius Caesar and the new pantomime. To have all those noble Romans alive before me and walking in front out for my entertainment, instead of being the stern taskmasters that they had been at school, was a most novel and delightful act. So they're acting out old stories, and Davy found it amusing that he could sit there and watch it happen instead of being in school, being forced to read about it. But the mingled reality and mystery of the whole show, the influence upon me of the poetry, the lights, the music, the company, the smooth, stupendous changes of glittering and brilliant scenery, were so dazzling, so impressive. Dazzling kind of means like shiny and impressive. Like stars. Stars are dazzling. And opened up such illimitable regions of delight that when I came out into the rainy street at 12 o'clock at night, I felt as if I had come from the clouds, where I had been leading a romantic life for ages, to a bawling, splashing, link-lighted, umbrella-struggling, hackney coach jostling, patent clinking, muddy, miserable world. I had emerged by another door and stood in the street for a little while, as if I really were a stranger upon the earth. But the unceremonious pushing and hustling that I received soon recalled me to myself, and put me in the road back to the hotel, whither I went. Whither it isn't really commonly used in modern English, but that means like to where I went, to the place where I went. You could still use it, I guess, but people would think it's strange. Revolving the glorious vision all the way, and where after some porter and oysters, I sat revolving it still at past 1 o'clock, with my eyes on the coffee room fire. I was so filled with the play and with the past, for it was in a manner like a shining transparency through which I saw my earlier life moving along, that I don't know when the figure of a handsome, well-formed young man dressed with a tasteful, easy negligence, which I have reason to remember very well, became a real presence to me. But I recollect being conscious of his company without having noticed his coming in, and my still sitting there musing over the coffee room fire. Okay, so he's sitting there at 1 o'clock in the morning, and he's just sitting there enjoying the coffee room fire. And he notices that maybe he could see, like, on the side, somebody is in the room, and he knows that they're dressed very well, and he can feel their presence, but I guess he doesn't know who it is. But for some reason, like, maybe he feels like somebody is looking at him, or somehow he feels strange. There's somebody special in the room. At last I rose up to go to bed, much to the relief of the sleepy waiter, who had got the fidgets in his legs. Remember, fidgeting is moving, like uncontrollable movements, fidgeting, moving around for no reason, and was twisting them and hitting them and putting them through all kinds of contortions in his small pantry. And going towards the door, I passed the person who had come in, and saw him plainly. I turned directly, and came back and looked at him. He did not know me, but I knew him in a moment. At another time, I might have wanted the confidence or the decision to speak to him, and might have put it off until the next day. To put something off means to delay something. So if this were any other time, maybe when he was a little bit younger, he probably would not have walked past the man and then come back to look at him, because he knew who it was. He realized who it was. Even though that man didn't recognize him, he knew who the man was. And if it had been some other time earlier, he probably would have put it off, delayed it, like waited until the next day. Because, they're staying in a hotel, so probably this man is also in the hotel. So he might have put it off until the next day, and might have lost him, but in the then condition of my mind, where the play was still running high, his former protection of me appeared so deserving of my gratitude, and my old love for him overflowed my breast so freshly and spontaneously, that I went up to him at once with a fast-beating heart and said, "Steerforth, won't you speak to me?" He looked at me, just as he used to look. Sometimes, but I saw no recognition in his face. Now remember, when Davy was entering London, they passed Salem House, and that was the school where his evil father-in-law sent him when he first married his mother. And in that school, it was horrible. They used to beat him. And it was a horrible time, except Steerforth, who was an older boy in the school, and who Davy loved very much and admired very much, protected him, and they became very good friends while they were both in the school. And now Davy is seeing him here in the coffee room at the hotel. "You don't remember me, I'm afraid," said I. "My God," he suddenly exclaimed, "it's little Copperfield." I grasped him with both hands, and could not let them go, but for very shame, and the fear that it might displease him. I could have held him round the neck and cried. I never was so glad, my dear Steerforth. I'm so overjoyed to see you. And I am rejoiced to see you too, he said, shaking my hands heartily. Why, Copperfield, old boy, don't be overpowered. And yet he was glad too, I thought, to see how the delight I had in meeting him affected me. I brushed away the tears that my utmost resolution had not been able to keep back. So he's saying, I'm trying not to cry, but it was no use. I started crying, so I brushed away the tears. And I made a clumsy laugh to it. So he said, something like that. I'm no actor. And we sat down side by side. Why, how do you come to be here? Said Steerforth, clapping me on the shoulder. I came here by the Canterbury coach today. I've been adopted by my aunt down in that part of the country, and have just finished my education there. How do you come to be here, Steerforth? Well, I'm what they call an Oxford man, he returned. That is to say, I get bored to death down there, periodically, and I'm on my way now to my mother's. You're a devilish amiable-looking fellow, Copperfield. Just what you used to be. Now I look at you, not altered in the least. I knew you immediately, I said, but you were more easily remembered. He laughed as he ran his hand through the clustering curls of his hair, and said gaily, that means he said very happily, yes, I'm on an expedition of duty. My mother lives a little way out of town, and the roads being in a beastly condition, and our house tedious enough, I remained here tonight instead of going on. I have not been in town 6 hours, and those I have been dozing and grumbling away at the play. I've been at the play too. So Davy thought the play was wonderful. He was very impressed by it, but Steerforth was also at the play, and he was very bored. At Covent Garden, what a delightful and magnificent entertainment, Steerforth. Steerforth laughed heartily. My dear young Davy, he said, clapping me on the shoulder again, you are a very daisy. That's what they used to call him at the school, Daisy. Daisy is a flower, a type of flower. Daisy of the field at sunrise. It's not fresher than you are. I've been at Covent Garden too, and there never was a more miserable business. Halloa, you, sir. I don't know what that means, halloa. Oh, it's like hello, I guess, in a funny way to get the waiter's attention, because it says, this was addressed to the waiter, who had been very attentive to our recognition at a distance, and now came forward deferentially. Where have you put my friend Mr. Copperfield? Said Steerforth. Beg your pardon, sir? Where does he sleep? What is his number? You know what I mean, said Steerforth. Well, sir, said the waiter, with an apologetic air, Mr. Copperfield is at present in 42, sir. And what the devil do you mean, retorted Steerforth, by putting Mr. Copperfield into a little loft over the stable? Why, you see, we wasn't aware, sir, returned the waiter, still apologetically, as Mr. Copperfield was any way particular. We can give Mr. Copperfield 72, sir, if it would be preferred, next to you, sir. Of course it would be preferred, said Steerforth, and do it at once. So Steerforth says, what room is Davy in? And they tell him which room. It's a horrible little room, and because all these people are taking advantage of him. They're charging him a lot of money, and they're not giving him anything. They're charging him a lot of money for wine, and they're giving him garbage. And because he's very inexperienced. He's paying for a room, and they're giving him a little horrible place to stay for the night. So Steerforth is doing just exactly what he did at Salem House, the school. He's protecting Davy and looking out for him. Of course it would be preferred, said Steerforth, and do it at once. The waiter immediately withdrew to make the exchange. Steerforth was very much amused at my having been put into 42, laughed again, and clapped me on the shoulder again, and invited me to breakfast with him next morning at 10 o'clock. An invitation I was only too proud and happy to accept. It being now pretty late, we took our candles and went upstairs, where we parted with friendly heartiness at his door, and where I found my new room a great improvement on my old one. It not being at all musty. Musty means like smelling wet and moldy. And having an immense four-post bedstead in it, which was quite a little landed estate, here among pillows enough for 6. I soon fell asleep in a blissful condition. Blissful means extreme happiness, extreme comfort and happiness, and dreamed of ancient Rome, Steerforth and friendship, until the early morning coaches, rumbling out of the archway underneath, made me dream of thunder and the gods. Rumble is like a sound, like whoa, 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 whoa. But you can imagine the wheels of the horse coaches and the pounding of the feet of the horses making kind of a rumbling sound. All right, well, that was chapter 19 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. And so next time we will do chapter 20, Steerforth's Home. So it looks like Davy will join Steerforth in his visit to his mother. And so thank you everyone who stayed and watched until the end. I really appreciate it. And we'll be reading chapter 20 really soon. And I hope to see you there when we do. Goodbye.